I haven't made a video for a couple weeks. There hasn't been too much to discuss that hasn't already been discussed. Events are taking place that are interesting to observe. However, those who have watched the videos on this channel and understand the framework presented will recognize that the individual events are only part of a much bigger story that is playing out as it must. In other words, discussing the individual events themselves at this point will not add much to what's already here. I'll just mention the events now. Sit back and think on them in the bigger context of what I've discussed in my last video. General commodity prices have fallen. The Baltic Dry Index is at record lows. We've seen mass layoffs from many commodity-producing companies. High-yield debt is under stress and is selling at deep discounts on the secondary market. Credit default swaps on banks such as Credit Suisse and Deutsche Bank are rising quickly as the stocks of many of the world's big banks start to succumb to selling pressure. Gold and silver are starting to rise as large tranches of gold are moved from the registered category to the eligible category on the COMEX. The new silver fix mechanism finds a price that is 6% below market, creating instant losses for anyone who was on the long side of silver options. The Bank of Japan announces negative interest rates shortly before Japan finds it needs to cancel its bond auction. Currencies are fluctuating against each other with wilder and wilder swings. Currencies in South America are devalued as many in their middle class start to find it difficult to make ends meet. Former boom areas such as North Dakota and Alberta find their unemployment rates skyrocket along with their rates of substance abuse and suicide. News stories start to appear about the need to move towards a cashless society. What are all these events? They are simply bits and pieces of a big story. Think of them as falling snowflakes or blowing leaves on a shortened day in late November. For anyone who knows that winter is approaching, none of it should come as a surprise. Build yourself a fire. Sit down with a good book. Pour yourself a glass of bourbon. And as the band Tool suggests in their song Disposition, watch the weather change. Sometimes it's good just to sit back and watch as the future is revealed to us. And by the way, I was tempted to overlay Disposition as I mentioned each one of these recent events, but I didn't want to be flagged by YouTube for copyright violation. If you want to experience what I just said the way that it had played out in my head, please play Tool's Disposition at low volume and replay the first part of this video. So what is this video going to be about? Well, a subscriber posted a question which I thought would be a good topic for discussion. He wrote in regards to gold. Okay, I realize this is a silly argument, and I don't want to bash any of the economists that have openly been discussing this notion in the blogosphere, but which is it? A commodity or a store of value? I think we can all testify to the manipulation in numerous techniques, psychological, statistical, futures, MSMs, and this due to the various administrative entities that need the dollar to be the store of value. Economics 101, it has no other use. This is what it does. On the other side of the debate, Harry Dent theory, it is acting uniformly to the other PMs and base metals. In my eyes, this shift, conditioning, in the perspective of gold and the dollar, be it true or false, is at the very foundation of market action in both. Don't worry, I won't be offended if you bash Harry a little. What is your perspective on this debate, and can you give us your premises for your conclusion? Maybe I'm trying to entice you into another vid. Okay, fair enough, and it's a good topic. Let's discuss it. Just as in my last video, I won't need charts. All I will offer this time are words. The charts are all there in my older videos for those who want to find them. Most will be in the playlist titled Why Gold and Silver Are Monetary Assets and Not Mere Commodities. We'll start with the definition of commodity from the Cambridge English Dictionary. It reads, a substance or product that can be traded, bought, and sold. That's a rather broad definition, don't you think? According to that definition, a politician would be a commodity. Sorry about that last joke. I meant no offense to the other commodities of the world that do not have the privilege of holding high office. Gold is certainly a substance. After it is refined and formed into bars, coin, or jewelry, it's also a product. It can also be traded, bought, and sold. Thus, by the definition given by the Cambridge English Dictionary, it is a commodity. This is strictly correct, according to the definition, and I will not argue that this is true. Just the same, calling gold a commodity and assuming that it has the same qualities and follows the same rules as all other commodities is rather dismissive. I suppose if I made my living selling financial products to the masses, I'd be tempted to stop here. I might even be tempted to make a flippant comment about gold being a pet rock. But doing so would not be intellectually honest. So let's go a little deeper. Gold, like all other commodities, is certainly a substance. Let's compare and contrast gold against other substances. All substances are either pure elements or combinations of elements. Very few substances are found in elemental form because most elements are reactive and tend, at least over geologic timescales, to combine with other elements. The chief exceptions to this rule are the noble gases on the right-hand side of the periodic table. These are helium, neon, argon, krypton, xenon, and radon. All other elements, with the notable exceptions of gold and platinum, are reactive. Copper, silver, palladium, osmium, and rhodium can also be found in elemental form. They do tend to react slowly with oxygen and sulfur, but also tend to passivate, which means that once they react on the surface, the reaction tends to not penetrate any further. Most owners of silver have seen oxides form on their coins or bars. The non-reactive nature of gold and platinum and resistance to reaction of copper, silver, palladium, osmium, and rhodium make these metals rather useful from the standpoint of being low maintenance. A person who owned some of these metals and placed them in storage for years or even decades could be certain that they would not change much over time, thus being rather immutable. The same cannot be said for other elemental metals such as iron, which would tend to oxidize over time unless it was alloyed with quite a bit of chromium. Gold and platinum are unique because they will not fade, discolor, or change over time, even over long periods of time. They are almost made to be stored. Speaking of storage of gold and platinum, they are very, very easy to store. They are extremely dense, and one can easily store a high-value quantity of metal in a small space. A 1-ounce gold coin can be purchased for about $1,200 currently. This represents about 1 month worth of wages for a minimum wage earner. So one could envision having a pocket full of gold and it being valued at the equivalent of about a year's worth of minimum wage labor. Platinum is similar. The other native metals are also easy to store. Silver, for example, can store quite a bit of wealth in a small space. However, the same pocketful of silver would really only represent a couple of days' worth of minimum wage labor, at least at current prices. So gold is fairly unique in that it is non-reactive and very value dense, and there are a few substances outside of gemstones that share these qualities. Why is it so important that there are items that are value dense and durable? Well, let's suppose that you're a person who is a little skeptical of human nature and do not want to entrust your entire life savings to the custody of another. Being able to buy a durable and value-dense item is one way to avoid having to entrust your wealth to the stewardship of another person. It is also a great way to ensure privacy. Storing a high-value item such as gold yourself is a great way to ensure that nobody knows that you are a person of means. It is wealth that is non-discoverable in litigation, meaning that it won't be the target of frivolous lawsuits. And, in the event that your government becomes abusive, it can be kept in secret, or even moved across borders easily, either personally or via courier. With no other substance other than gemstones and very rare metals, would it be easy to keep in secret $1 million worth of value, much less carry it with you. So gold is durable, private, and highly portable. What other aspects make it rather unique relative to other substances? Because of its history, it is highly recognizable. Go anywhere in the world, and you will find that even the most poorly educated know what gold is. They may not currently appreciate its value, as Mark Dice has often demonstrated, but they do know what it is. Ask someone about rhodium, or even platinum sometime, and you'll probably be greeted with a blank stare. As a side note, this is one of the reasons why, even though platinum is historically inexpensive relative to gold, I don't buy much of it. Now, recognizability is just about a person knowing what an item is. It is important that a person also be able to easily assay the item to determine its quality. Gold, because it's an element, has some well-documented properties that can be used to test its purity. If someone were to bring to me a quantity of gold to trade for something else, I would be able to fairly quickly test its Brinell hardness, its specific gravity, its reactivity, or its melting point if I had any doubt about its authenticity. And the less experienced among us could generally tell whether or not a gold coin was authentic by feeling the weight of it in the hand and by listening to the pitch of the ring resulting from pinging its edge. The same is not true for most other substances. For example, gemstones are very non-uniform, and it takes a very skilled and knowledgeable person to determine the quality of the stone. Other substances, such as bottles of vintage wine, also require quite a bit of skill, and thus will not be as easy to trade for services or other items of value. Generally, the sale of any high-value item that is not pure precious metal will involve high assay costs, so that the person who accepts them can be assured of their authenticity. Gold, being a metal, is also easily divided into smaller quantities without affecting its value. Fracture a gemstone, and the total weight of the shards will not be equal to the original value of the stone. Sure, one can argue that cutting an MS-64 1848 $10 Liberty Head gold coin in half would destroy its value. But that's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about is gold bullion. And I'm not saying this is an important thing for barter, although it certainly could be. The reason it's important is that it provides the person of modest means an opportunity that is also open to the wealthy. A person who holds a plain vanilla gold bullion 1-ounce gold coin will command roughly 1% of the wealth that the person who has a 100-ounce good delivery gold bar will command. The wealth contained in a massive gold bullion is proportional to its amount. Another reason why this is so important is that it allows a person to liquidate a fraction of his wealth holding. A person who holds a rental real estate property, for example, as his or her main wealth possession, will find that the entire property would need to be sold in order to access the equity in the house, assuming the person is averse to taking out a loan against the property. Contrast this to a 100-ounce pile of gold coins. This type of wealth holding can be liquidated in single coin increments. All of these properties I just mentioned, immutability, portability, recognizability, and divisibility, make gold a very unique substance amongst all the others. But we still haven't touched upon the primary reasons why gold has risen to the top of all the other substances as the store of value par excellence. The first and most obvious one is its rarity. Gold's abundance in the Earth's crust is about 3 parts per billion. That means that for every billion particles of other stuff that exists in the ground, about 3 of it is gold. Platinum is also quite rare at 4 parts per billion. Palladium is about 6 parts per billion, and silver is about 80 parts per billion. That's why these are called the precious metals. We can compare these concentrations against industrially important metals. Lead is present in the Earth's crust at about 10 parts per million. That's million with an M. Copper is 68 parts per million. Nickel, 90 parts per million. Iron, 50,000 parts per million. And aluminum is 80,000 parts per million. Now this does not mean that when gold is found, it is at a concentration of 3 parts per billion. It would be completely uneconomic to extract gold at that concentration. Gold is present in deep veins of ore, which are economic to process. The richest veins right now have gold concentrations in the neighborhood of 10 to 20 grams of gold per ton of ore. And those are the richest. The average grade processed by the world's operating mining companies is just over 1 gram of gold per ton. Now think about this for a minute. Gold, when averaged over the entire Earth's crust, is 3 parts per billion. And when veins of ore are found, the average ore grade is about 1 gram per ton. This means that gold veins are extremely rare, which means that the exploration costs involved in finding new and economic gold deposits are huge. On top of that, once the gold ore is found, about 1 ton of rock needs to be blasted, extracted, crushed, and processed to obtain 1 gram of gold. In other words, the 1 ounce gold coin that you have probably involved the processing of 31 tons of rock. In addition, the cost of producing that ounce also includes administrative burden, assay costs, minting costs, and taxes. It's a very expensive operation producing each incremental ounce of gold, and as more gold is produced, the grade of the remaining deposits goes down, making the production of future gold even more expensive. But the high cost of production is not the whole story. Gold has, throughout history, been one of the most desired and sought-after substances on Earth. Yet, since the mid-19th century, which is 1850 and beyond, the amount of gold produced on an annual basis only added at most 3% to the above-ground stock. This number has been gradually declining as ore grades have declined and discoveries have become less frequent. For the past few years, the amount of gold produced has only added somewhere between 1.5 to 2% to the roughly 5.5 billion ounce above-ground stock. This makes the total supply of gold extremely stable over time. Regardless how highly priced gold becomes relative to production costs, you simply will not find the gold stock doubling in a year's time. The same cannot be said, for example, of the M0 money supply. Nor does the same apply to most other substances, silver being the closest exception, where above-ground stocks probably stand at about 18 years' worth of production. Other commodities are produced in a more or less just-in-time manner. Copper, aluminum, iron ore, lead, and nickel are costly to store. They are produced and sold as quickly as possible, and so the total inventory of each tends to be less than 1 year worth of production. Gold and silver, by contrast, are held in hoards, both public and private, worldwide. Gold, because it tends to not be used in industry, has the highest above-ground stock relative to production, standing at about 60 years. Gold, as opposed to most other substances, has few uses other than jewelry. So why is it so widely held? Why is it valued so highly? The primary reason is that it is a luxury item. Why are Rolex watches so highly valued? They're no more useful than a good citizen wristwatch. The answer? The Rolex watch is a luxury item. Why do 3 bottles of Chateau Lafite Rothschild 1869 wine go for $700,000 at auction, even though the bottles will never be consumed? The answer? They're luxury items. And the funny thing about luxury items is that they can be valued arbitrarily highly, and the higher the price tag, the more people seem to desire them. For a more detailed discussion, please watch my video titled Utility versus Store of Value. And this is one of the primary reasons why the wealthy choose to own gold. Aside from it being a long-term family tradition, it's also a luxury item. And the fact that gold is divisible means that you can own something of the same quality as the rich, which is not so much the case for artwork or Chateau Lafite Rothschild wine or Rolex watches. Pretty cool, huh? But what evidence do we have that all of this gold is highly valued? Well, simply look at the market value of all of the 5.5 billion ounces of above-ground stock. It's currently worth $6.6 trillion, most of which is not coming to market at current prices. There is no flood of gold to the market. The current $1,200 is mostly dictated by the marginal supply hitting the market, which comes from the mines. The mining companies are the ones who are selling the gold. They don't require a price that's much above their current cost of production, simply because the mining industry is like any other industry. They exist to make a profit expressed in local currency. The gold in central bank vaults tends to stay in the global banking system. It tends to move from one central bank to another. You will never find a record of a central bank bringing their gold to a public auction. And the private hoards of gold also tend not to hit the market. This is something that the oil states discovered in the late 1970s. In that decade, the oil states lost confidence in the dollar, and they sought to cycle their dollar profits into gold by bidding for gold on the spot market. The increase in prices did not bring more gold to market. Quite the contrary, it made the supply of gold dry up. It only succeeded in raising prices to very high levels. The wealthy of the world, who already owned gold, knew what was happening and had no interest in parting with their gold at any price, especially if it meant taking in return paper scrip whose future was uncertain. It was only after the derivatives market in gold was established to allow the oil states to secure future gold supply from the mining industry that gold prices were brought back under control. This whole event in the late 1970s is evidence that the above-ground stock is very highly valued. A rising price will not coax it out onto the market. Quite the contrary, a rising price of gold simply signifies an uncertain future for the currency in which the gold is denominated, and the wealthy recognize this. The gold is wealth that they keep, not the wealth that they trade for profit. Now, that's not to say that they don't lend their gold for profit. I've described the process by which they do that in many of my videos. But they will only lend their gold if they are confident in the return of their gold. And it is interesting that so much registered gold was reclassified as eligible in the COMEX recently. This suggests that the faith in gold return is waning. Now back to my subscriber's original question. Is gold a commodity, or is it a store of value? My premise is that it is both. By definition, it is a commodity. However, to lump it in with all other commodities is intellectually dishonest. Unlike other commodities, it is very value dense. It is immutable. It is highly recognizable, and it's divisible. It can be used to secure wealth in a way that is immune from counterparty risk. It can be easily hidden, and it is highly portable. Above all else, it is a luxury item and can be valued very highly without bringing much new supply to market. It is not just a store of value, it is the best store of value. It is what will work when all else fails. History has shown us this, and the wealthy of the world know this to be true. So with all that said, relax. Take all of these recent events in the context of the bigger picture of the future that's unfolding before us. Ignore the distractions of commentators who only examine price movements and never dig deeper than that. Go build yourself a small fire. Relax with a nice glass of bourbon or wine. Hold one of your gold coins in your hand and ponder gold's disposition. And together, we'll watch the weather change.